Prince Harry sat in a London courtroom, tears welling in his eyes, addressing the judge as "My Lord," while making allegations so explosive they could cost British newspapers millions upon millions of dollars. The prince, fifth in line to the throne, a man who walked away from royal duty claiming he needed privacy and peace, was under oath and unleashing accusations that painted the UK media as villains responsible for destroying his wife, his family, and his entire sense of security. Sources say he was emotional, defiant, and absolutely convinced of his own righteousness. But here is where this story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Just 72 hours after this tearful courtroom performance, Prince Harry did something that completely and utterly undermined every single word he had just spoken about wanting privacy. He flew straight to the Sundance Film Festival, walked a red carpet alongside Meghan Markle, posed for dozens of photographers, and basked in the glow of Hollywood attention. Let that sink in for a moment. The man who just told a judge that media intrusion made his life unbearable voluntarily inserted himself into one of the most photographed events in the entertainment industry. The irony is so thick you could choke on it. And folks, what happened at Sundance, combined with the brutal allegations Harry made in that courtroom, reveals something deeply uncomfortable about this couple and the contradictions they simply cannot escape. The walls of their carefully constructed narrative are developing cracks, and what is leaking through those cracks is devastatingly revealing. The timing of Harry's transatlantic journey from courtroom drama to film festival glamour has raised eyebrows across 2 continents, and for very good reason. One moment he is tearfully telling a British judge about the horrors of media intrusion, and the next he is schmoozing with Hollywood executives and posing alongside his wife at a premiere for a documentary about Girl Scouts selling cookies. Sources familiar with the situation describe it as tone-deaf on a spectacular level. Industry insiders are practically choking on their coffee watching the prince, who claims to despise media attention, actively seeking it out at every available opportunity. But the Sundance appearance was not even the most revealing part of Harry's week. Reports from inside the courtroom paint a picture of a prince who struggled significantly under legal scrutiny. The judge presiding over Harry's case against newsgroup newspapers allegedly grew frustrated with the prince's testimony style on multiple occasions. According to those who witnessed the proceedings, Harry had to be reminded repeatedly that he was there to answer questions, not to deliver speeches or argue with opposing counsel. One legal observer described it as watching someone who is accustomed to never being challenged, suddenly finding himself in a situation where his word is not automatically accepted as truth. The judge reportedly intervened more than once to redirect Harry's rambling responses back to the actual questions being asked. For a man who has spent years controlling his own narrative through carefully produced documentaries and a best-selling memoir, the courtroom clearly presented an unfamiliar and uncomfortable environment. Harry's specific allegations against the newspapers were nothing short of incendiary. He claimed that tabloids deliberately tried to push him toward drugs and drinking specifically to sell papers. He alleged that private investigators rummaged through his trash. He accused publications of phone hacking and systematic targeting designed to make his life and Meghan's life absolute misery. These are serious accusations that, if proven true, would represent genuine violations of privacy and potentially criminal behavior. But here is where Harry's credibility starts to wobble. The very same prince who accuses newspapers of trying to push him towards substance abuse wrote extensively in his memoir Spare about what he called his joyful experimentation with cocaine and marijuana. He has publicly discussed participating in ayahuasca ceremonies and credited psychedelic drugs with helping him process his trauma. Allow me to translate. Harry is arguing that newspapers victimized him by allegedly encouraging drug use while simultaneously promoting his own drug experiences as positive and therapeutic in a book he sold for an estimated $20 million. But the courtroom revelations were not the only disaster unfolding for the Sussexes this week, and what happened at that Sundance screening is even more embarrassing than anyone could have predicted. The specific allegations Harry made under oath deserve careful examination, because they reveal both the depth of his grievances and the contradictions that undermine them. Harry cited articles from 2005 about his relationship with Chelsea Davy as evidence of media intrusion into his private life. He claims these stories were obtained through illegal means and caused immense damage to his relationships and mental health. Sources close to the case say Harry became particularly emotional when discussing how tabloid coverage allegedly destroyed his romance with Chelsea and set a pattern that would repeat throughout his life. One insider familiar with the testimony described it as Harry relitigating every perceived wrong from the past 2 decades. Another observer noted that he seemed to blame the press for essentially every negative experience he has ever had. Let us be brutally honest here about the drug narrative Harry is pushing. The prince stood in a courtroom and accused newspapers of deliberately trying to make him an addict. He painted himself as a victim of a coordinated campaign to destroy his life through substance abuse. But this is the same Harry who wrote thousands of words in Spare describing his recreational drug use in terms that can only be described as nostalgic. He detailed snorting cocaine in bathrooms. He waxed poetic about smoking marijuana with friends. He enthusiastically endorsed psychedelic therapy and described his ayahuasca experiences in glowing detail. The contrast between Courtroom Harry and Memoir Harry is absolutely staggering. In one venue, drugs were a weapon used against him. In another venue, drugs were a joyful journey of self-discovery that he encouraged others to consider. You cannot have it both ways, and yet Harry seems genuinely confused about why people find this inconsistency problematic. The timeline Harry presented in court also raises questions that his lawyers will eventually need to address. Many of the articles he cited as evidence of harassment were published years before he even met Meghan Markle. Yet sources say Harry repeatedly brought up Meghan's suffering during testimony about events that predated their relationship by nearly a decade. One courtroom observer noted that Harry seemed determined to make every question about Meghan, even when the questions were specifically about incidents from 2005 or 2008. The judge reportedly had to remind him on more than one occasion to focus on the actual time period being discussed rather than leaping forward to grievances from his marriage. But the judge's growing frustration with Harry's testimony style reveals something even more uncomfortable about how the prince handles any form of scrutiny. The courtroom dynamics between Prince Harry and the presiding judge have become a story unto themselves, and what witnesses describe is genuinely fascinating. According to multiple reports, the judge had to intervene repeatedly to remind Harry that a legal proceeding has specific rules about how questions are answered. Harry allegedly wanted to deliver statements rather than provide direct responses. He reportedly attempted to argue with opposing counsel rather than simply answering yes or no when appropriate. One legal expert who observed portions of the testimony described it as watching someone who has never been told no suddenly encountering a system that does not care about his title or his feelings. The judge, sources say, was professional but clearly exasperated at points. For those unfamiliar with how courtroom testimony works, let me explain why this matters. When you are under oath, you are supposed to answer the questions asked of you. You do not get to redirect the conversation. You do not get to make speeches. You do not get to argue your case through your answers. That is what your lawyers are for. Harry's apparent inability to follow these basic rules suggests a man who is so accustomed to controlling every narrative around him that he cannot function in an environment where someone else sets the terms. One insider put it bluntly: he wanted to be interviewed, not cross-examined. He wanted soft questions and sympathetic nods, not lawyers poking holes in his story. And that is not how courts work. The tendency to bring up Meghan when discussing events from long before they met is particularly telling. Harry reportedly could not discuss his 2005 relationship with Chelsea Davy without pivoting to how media treatment allegedly prepared the ground for what Meghan would later endure. He could not address phone hacking allegations from 2008 without somehow connecting them to his wife's experience a decade later. Sources describe it as an almost compulsive need to center Meghan in every grievance, even when she was literally not present in his life during the events being discussed. One observer called it a pattern of retroactive victimhood, where Harry reinterprets his entire past through the lens of his current marriage. But here is where it gets really interesting. While Harry was struggling in the courtroom, reports were emerging about struggles of a very different kind happening in his personal life. New information suggests that the prince, who once held one of the most prominent positions in the world, now allegedly feels without purpose, sidelined not by the media he blames for everything, but by his own wife. New reports from Page 6 and other outlets paint a devastating picture of Prince Harry's current situation. And folks, the irony is almost too much to bear. The man who left the royal family because he felt overshadowed and undervalued reportedly now feels the exact same way in his own marriage. Sources claim Harry lacks a steady income and has found himself positioned as the supporting player in Meghan's entrepreneurial ventures rather than as an equal partner. One insider described it as watching a man go from sixth in line to a throne to second in line in his own household. The spare has apparently become the spare again, and this time there is no institution to blame. The dynamics on display at Sundance were particularly revealing. According to witnesses at the Cookie Queen's premiere, Harry stood silently beside Meghan while she worked the room, gave interviews, and positioned herself as the star of the show. Reports indicate that Meghan spoke before the documentary's actual director during media opportunities, a breach of Hollywood protocol that raised eyebrows among festival veterans. One industry insider observed that Harry looked like he was there to carry the handbag, not to be an actual participant. Another source noted that he seemed uncertain about his role, hovering awkwardly while Meghan commanded attention. Let us be brutally honest about what this represents. Harry gave up his family, his country, his military titles, and his position in one of the most famous institutions on earth. He did this, according to his own narrative, because he felt stifled and wanted to forge his own path alongside the woman he loved. But multiple reports now suggest that Harry has simply traded one form of being overshadowed for another. At least when he was a working royal, he had a defined role and clear purpose. Now, according to sources, he allegedly wanders through his days without steady work while Meghan pursues her Hollywood dreams with the single-minded focus of someone building a personal brand. The financial dynamics make this even more awkward. Reports suggest that Meghan is positioning herself as the breadwinner of the family, the one with the business ventures and the entrepreneurial vision. Harry's contributions, according to these sources, have dwindled to occasional appearances and his ongoing legal battles. One source close to the situation described it as a complete role reversal from what Harry expected when they left royal life. He thought they would be equals building something together. Instead, she is building her empire, and he is along for the ride. But the Sundance screening itself revealed something even more embarrassing about where Harry and Meghan actually stand in the Hollywood hierarchy. Despite all the Sussex star power, despite the red carpet arrival and the media attention, the Cookie Queen screening at Sundance reportedly had 150 empty seats when the film began. Let that number sink in for a moment. 150 seats. In a festival where coveted premiere spots are fought over like scraps of meat, Harry and Meghan could not fill their theater. Sources familiar with the screening say that festival staff had to actively usher in people from the waitlist and standby lines to fill premium reserved seats that had been held for VIP guests who simply never showed up. The contrast with other Sundance premieres could not have been more brutal. The previous night, at the exact same venue, a different premiere had been standing room only. People were literally turned away at the door because there was no space to accommodate them. Festival insiders say that kind of demand is what Sundance lives for, what filmmakers dream of, what represents genuine industry excitement about a project. And then Harry and Meghan showed up for their documentary, and 150 seats sat empty. One industry observer described it as a reality check that no amount of royal titles can overcome. Another source said it was proof that the Sussex brand has worn thin in Hollywood circles. For those who remember the breathless coverage of Harry and Meghan's initial Netflix deal, reportedly worth $100 million, this Sundance screening represents a sobering moment of truth. The couple was supposed to conquer Hollywood. They were supposed to become content creation royalty. Instead, they are producing documentaries about Girl Scout cookies that cannot fill a theater at a film festival. One executive who attended the screening noted that the energy in the room was polite but not enthusiastic. Another described it as the kind of premiere where people are there because they should be, not because they want to be. The empty seats are particularly devastating because Sundance is exactly the kind of event where Harry and Meghan should theoretically thrive. It is glamorous, it is celebrity-friendly, it attracts the kind of progressive, socially conscious audience that the Sussexes have tried to court. If they cannot generate excitement here, where can they generate excitement? One festival veteran put it this way: Sundance audiences will show up for almost anything if they think it matters. The fact that they did not show up for this tells you everything you need to know. But the empty seats were not even the biggest problem with Cookie Queens, because sources say the documentary itself created unexpected controversy that neither Harry nor Meghan anticipated. Harry and Meghan may have accidentally stepped into a minefield with their own documentary, and the irony is absolutely delicious. Cookie Queens, which is supposed to be an uplifting film about young girls selling Girl Scout cookies and learning entrepreneurship, reportedly contains revelations that have made the actual Girl Scouts organization distinctly uncomfortable. Sources claim the documentary exposes a practice where wealthy parents essentially buy their daughters' way to cookie-selling success by purchasing thousands of boxes themselves. The feel-good narrative about plucky young entrepreneurs apparently has a dark underbelly involving class privilege and checkbook victories. Allow me to translate what this means for the Sussex brand. Harry and Meghan have built their entire public identity around championing equality, fighting against unfair systems, and lifting up the marginalized. And now their documentary allegedly shows that even Girl Scout cookie sales are rigged in favor of rich kids whose parents can drop thousands of dollars on boxes they will never eat. One source close to the production described it as a messaging nightmare they did not see coming. Another insider noted that the Girl Scouts organization has apparently distanced itself from the film, declining to participate in promotion or publicity. The class dynamics exposed in the documentary create a particularly uncomfortable situation for Meghan, who has worked hard to cultivate an image as a relatable everywoman despite her millionaire lifestyle. Here she is producing a film that apparently shows wealthy parents buying success for their children, while she herself reportedly demands to be addressed by royal titles and lives in a $16 million Montecito mansion. One observer pointed out the cognitive dissonance. She wants to critique class privilege while benefiting from it. She wants to champion the little guy while insisting everyone call her princess. It does not work. The timing of this controversy could not be worse for the Sussex production company. Archwell Productions has already struggled to produce content that generates genuine buzz. Their Netflix series about their own lives was heavily watched but drew criticism for being self-serving and one-sided. Their other projects have failed to capture public imagination. Now Cookie Queens, which was supposed to be a safe, positive, uncontroversial piece about children and cookies, has become yet another source of awkwardness and criticism. One industry source said it is like they cannot touch anything without creating a problem for themselves. But the documentary controversy pales in comparison to what sources are revealing about Meghan's behavior behind the scenes at Sundance. and these reports paint a picture that directly contradicts her carefully cultivated public image. Sources are now claiming that Meghan had very specific instructions for how she should be addressed at the Cookie Queen's premiere, and folks, you cannot make this stuff up. According to reports, people interacting with Meghan at the children's film screening were allegedly told to refer to her as Duchess Meghan, Princess Meghan, or simply Mom. Never just Meghan, never anything that might suggest she is just a regular person like everyone else. At a premiere for a documentary about young girls selling cookies, let that sink in for a moment. A film supposedly celebrating the scrappy entrepreneurship of ordinary children required everyone to treat its producer like actual royalty. The contradiction here is so massive it threatens to collapse under its own weight. This is a woman who has repeatedly said she left royal life because she found the formality stifling. She has complained about protocol and tradition. She has positioned herself as someone who just wants to be herself, free from the constraints of monarchy. And yet, according to these sources, she allegedly demands that people at a film festival use her royal titles when speaking to her. One insider described it as wanting all the perks of royalty with none of the responsibilities. Another source noted that even actual working royals do not typically insist on formal address in casual settings. But wait, it gets better. Reports also claim that questions about Meghan's daughter Lilibet were allegedly forbidden during press interactions, despite the fact that Cookie Queens is literally a documentary about young girls. The film focuses on female entrepreneurs. It celebrates young women achieving success. It would seem natural and appropriate to ask Meghan about her own daughter in that context. Yet sources say the topic was apparently off limits. One journalist who attended described it as contradictory on every level. Another noted that Meghan seemed happy to discuss her children when it served her narrative, but apparently drew sharp lines around any questions she could not control. The title demands are particularly galling given that Meghan has repeatedly criticized the royal family for being out of touch with ordinary people. She has painted herself as the victim of a cold, formal institution that valued protocol over humanity. And now here she is, according to sources, allegedly insisting that film festival attendees address her with the very titles she claims to have escaped. The hypocrisy is so thick you could spread it on toast. One observer familiar with Sussex operations described it as a pattern of wanting to be treated like royalty while complaining about royalty. It is exhausting to watch, but these behind-the-scenes demands came just as another high-profile rejection reportedly delivered a devastating blow to Meghan's carefully maintained image. Sources are now claiming that Meghan allegedly attempted to secure an invitation to the funeral of fashion legend Valentino Garavani and was firmly refused. Let us pause on this for a moment. A funeral. She allegedly tried to get invited to a funeral for a designer she had no documented relationship with. The reports, which have circulated among fashion industry insiders, suggest that Meghan or her representatives reached out seeking access to the private service and were told in no uncertain terms that she was not welcome. One source close to the situation described it as genuinely bizarre behavior. Another called it symptomatic of her desperate need to be seen. The guest list at Valentino's funeral included genuine fashion icons with decades-long relationships with the designer. Gwyneth Paltrow, who had worn his designs for years and maintained a personal friendship, Anne Hathaway, who famously wore Valentino to the Academy Awards, Elizabeth Hurley, a longtime friend and muse. These were people who knew Valentino, who had actual connections to his life and work. Meghan, by contrast, reportedly had no such relationship. She apparently just wanted to be there because it would be a high-profile event with cameras and celebrities. One fashion insider put it bluntly: she treated a man's funeral like a networking opportunity. This alleged funeral invitation attempt fits a pattern that industry watchers have observed for years. Reports have previously surfaced about Meghan allegedly inviting herself to Paris Fashion Week events where she had no natural place. Sources claim she has repeatedly attempted to insert herself into celebrity gatherings where she was not originally included. One longtime fashion editor described it as someone who desperately wants to be in the room but does not understand that the room has to want her back. Another observer noted that Hollywood and fashion circles have long memories, and word spreads quickly about who is genuinely connected and who is just trying to climb. The rejection from Valentino's funeral is particularly stinging, because fashion was supposed to be one of Meghan's entry points into legitimate celebrity culture. She has styled herself as a fashion icon. She has launched a lifestyle brand. She reportedly receives extensive coverage for her clothing choices, but sources say the actual fashion industry has remained largely cool to her advances, viewing her as a celebrity wife rather than someone with genuine creative credentials. One designer who declined to be named said the industry can smell desperation, and she reeks of it. This pattern of rejections and social climbing attempts fits a larger trend that insiders say is devastating everything Harry and Meghan have tried to build. The central paradox of Harry's courtroom testimony is now impossible to ignore, and it cuts to the heart of everything this couple claims to represent. Harry sat before a judge and tearfully declared that the British media made Meghan's life absolute misery through their relentless coverage and intrusion. He painted his wife as a victim of harassment so severe that it drove her to dark places and nearly destroyed their family. This is serious, this is compelling. If true, it represents genuine suffering that deserves acknowledgement and perhaps legal remedy. But then you look at what Meghan actually does with her time, and the victim narrative falls apart completely. Meghan does not behave like someone who wants privacy and peace. She behaves like someone who craves attention and will pursue it through any available channel. She produces documentaries designed to put her in the spotlight. She launches podcasts about herself. She does magazine interviews and photo shoots. She walks red carpets at film festivals. She allegedly demands to be addressed by royal titles. She reportedly attempts to attend high-profile events where she was not invited. None of this is the behavior of a woman whose life has been made miserable by media attention. This is the behavior of a woman who wants more media attention, specifically attention she can control. Let us be brutally honest about what this reveals. Either Harry is exaggerating the misery in court to strengthen his legal case, or Meghan's public behavior completely contradicts her private suffering. Both possibilities are deeply unflattering. If Harry is overstating things, he is using the legal system to pursue grievances that do not rise to the level he claims. If Meghan truly suffered as Harry describes but continues to pursue publicity anyway, then she is prioritizing her brand over her mental health. One insider close to the couple described it as a contradiction they cannot explain away. Another source noted that the courtroom Harry and the Sundance Meghan seem to be living in completely different realities. Reports suggesting that Harry wants family reconciliation, while Meghan pursues Hollywood fame only deepen this paradox. Sources claim Harry misses his brother, his father, his home country. He allegedly did not want things to go this far. But Meghan, according to these same sources, has no interest in rebuilding royal bridges that do not serve her career ambitions. One person familiar with the situation described it as two people pulling in opposite directions while insisting they are on the same team. So here is the question that will not go away. After everything we have seen this week, after the courtroom tears and the Sundance empty seats and the alleged title demands and the reported funeral rejections, do you actually believe Harry's claims that the media is responsible for this couple's problems? Or is the truth staring us right in the face? Are Harry and Meghan their own worst enemies, creating the very misery they blame on everyone else? The evidence is piling up, and it does not look good for the official Sussex narrative. Drop your thoughts below. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The next video is waiting, and you will not believe what is coming next.